Hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon from wherever in the world you're joining us. Thank you for making time to join myself, Laura, and Josine today. We've just hit start. I think there is still quite a few more people who are yet to join, so we're going to give it a minute or so. But just to make sure that we're running live and everyone can hear us okay, it'd be great if you could put into the chat the audio is good. Hi. And also whereabouts you're tuning in from. It'd be lovely. Perfect. Ooh. Audio is good. Fabulous.
Oh, some great locations around the world. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, everyone. Yeah, that's really cool.
Not sure. Can you guys hear those notification sounds? I'm not sure you're seeing any.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Do you...
Maybe I can. I'm not sure. Maybe you can turn it off on your own.
My one's off. Do you have the little bell button at the top where you can push?
Okay. Yeah. Mute my notification sounds, and then I will only mute.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah. Not you. Yeah. Just like, no. Yeah. All good.
From India.
Hey guys. Awesome.
It's incredible.
Romania, Serbia,
Super excited.
Egypt, Amsterdam, Canada, Copenhagen, all over the world.
Literally.
Yeah.
Super exciting. Okay, I think before we get started, I'm sure people will keep running in as we go, so please do. I'd love for the chat to keep going, so if you have any questions as we go, we'll definitely be answering questions at the end, but at the same time, if there's any burning questions, please do throw them in, and we'll make our best effort to try and answer as many questions as possible. But for now, we'll get started. So first of all, to kick it off, this webinar is being brought to you by both Impraise and Sapling. Impraise and Sapling both operate in the HR and people space. Sapling is more focused on the onboarding and recruiting phase, and Impraise is more focused on the performance and development engagement phase, a slightly different cycle, parts of the employee life cycle. But we have also both experts from Impraise and Sapling on the chat, so if you have any questions, please do chuck it in the chat and we'll get back to you. Jumping straight into what are we going to cover today? So there's quite a lot of content that we're going to get through, and we have about 45 minutes, including time for questions at the end. So today you get to meet both Laura and Josine. We're diving into 3 topics, which is what are the building blocks for high-performing teams, and not only in general around the world, but specifically around remote and how we can make that work for the current climate. Moving into roles and responsibilities, so bridging that gap between both HR and managers. What are those roles and responsibilities? And then finally, some actual examples for you guys. So hopefully you can walk away with some tips and tricks on how you can implement that yourself. And if you have any questions at the end, we'll take some time to open the floor for everybody to join the discussion. So just a quick introduction for myself. My name is Dash, and I am the marketing manager here at Impraise, but it's definitely not about me today, so I'm going to introduce you to Josine first. Josine, would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Darsh. Hi, everyone. My name is Josine Muurling. I'm a psychologist and trainer, people skills trainer. I've been working in-house, mainly at universities first, and then I switched to one of the fastest growing startups in the Netherlands back then called Binder, which has been amazing. I worked there for over 3 years in the learning and development team, which was part of the bigger people and talent team, as we called it, which included HR and recruitment. And there I set up the learning and development department, did a lot of internal training and coaching in all layers of the organization, and that taught me a lot. And then recently in April, I started for myself. So now I get to work with many other especially tech companies, and it's been very exciting so far. So that's about me.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
We have got lots to teach the people that are listening today. And Laura, would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself as well?
Absolutely. So I have been a part of high-performing teams in the athletic world since my early 20s at a world, national, and Olympic level, in terms of an athlete and a coach, and have been coaching and educating for over 20 years and have recently started doing a little bit of executive coaching with Google and some of their founding companies that they're supporting through seed money. And, I'm really coming to this role of executive coaching, looking, 100% at the people from an athletic point of view and relying on how we build really strong and really successful athletic teams and translating that over into how to build really strong companies.
Amazing. Thank you. Two very different backgrounds there. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of information that we're going to get out of this. So let's go straight into it. The first section we're going to get into is the building blocks. So we know that high-performing teams aren't just made overnight. There are many components that come together to make teams successful, both in the athletic world and in the corporate world. So what is it that HR and leaders can do to get these components right in an organization? So to kick the conversation off, Josine, I'd love to hear your thoughts about actually what does it mean to be in a high-performing team? What actually is a high-performing team?
Yeah, that's a good question because it's quite a buzzword, right? We all want to work in a high-performing team. We all want to have high-performing teams in our company, but why? And what does it mean? And I always like to focus on a couple of things because you can say a lot about it. First of all, I think what is really important is that everyone in the team knows what they are there for. So they have clear roles and responsibilities. There's a clear and aligned purpose for themselves, for the team, and for the company. So everything ideally should be aligned. So they really understand also the why behind their work. I think that's an important one. And I always say the most important thing and the foundation should be trust, so that people feel safe enough to learn, to make mistakes, learn from each other. And trust goes both ways, right? So from leaders to the team and the other way around. And that's a topic on itself, of course, because how do you build trust? But we'll get there later as well. But I think those three things are the most important elements for me. Yeah.
And Laura, if you have anything to add to that one.
Absolutely. I think that so much of what high-performing teams do is hold each other accountable within the organization. But in order to get to that phase of having internal checkpoints, everyone really does need to be aligned on the same vision, which is, why we're here to talk about that connection between managers and HR and how they can help align the vision. Mm-hmm. A clear, succinct vision coming from leadership down is really what allows a platform for buy-in and allows you to succeed across all different genres of organizations. And that's something that's universal, regardless of whether you're coming from an athletic background, business background, a nonprofit organization, a for-profit organization. All of those essential building blocks are the same. Mm-hmm. And it really does start with this HR leadership role that we're about to dive into.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you speak about leadership really making sure that there's a clear mandate of what is the vision, what are the values of the organization. What happens in those instances when you've got a leadership team or, for example, a global organization and you're spread across the world? How do you bring about that ability to come together in these times?
I'll lead with this one. I think that articulation of vision can really happen on all levels, whether we're in person, whether it's via email, whether it's virtual meetings such as this. One of the things that I talk a lot about with various leaders of organizations when I'm working with them is, number one, first, you have to really define and clarify your vision. And then secondly, you have to pick a part of your vision to put in front of your organization on a weekly basis. Sometimes that weekly cultural vision could stay the same for multiple weeks, and sometimes it might change. One of the things that we have to do as leaders and as supporters in the HR field is we have to really understand the vision, but then also the supporting skills that go with that vision. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes that's separate from what we're doing in terms of our work, but it's the way that we're doing our work, whether we're being positive, whether we are being supportive, things of that nature. So really taking that second to define our cultural vision in addition to our workload expectation vision, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And do you see that as a role that HR is quite pivotal in making sure that those behaviors are seen and displayed across the company and have a responsibility to make sure that that sticks?
Absolutely. I think there's a really, I see leadership and HR as sort of head coach and assistant coach, right? And if the vision from the head coach is clearly aligned to HR, the assistant coach, then it's really easy for both platforms to deliver a really consistent message. Mm-hmm. I think the ultimate message has to come from the leader, from the founder, from the director, whatever that title is. And then HR can then support that vision that's really clear in a very articulate way.
Mm-hmm. And then in turn passing, of course, that information on to the team leads or the managers who are also responsible for making sure that the vision is recognized and realized.
Absolutely. And it's a daily thing. Cultural, like company culture, team culture, it's something that you have to work on a consistent basis. It's just as important as performance expectations and performance output. Mm-hmm. So many people leave managers and leave bosses. They don't necessarily leave jobs, right? So I'm hearing
trust as a foundational piece here that we have to have, irrespective of what type of team you're in, but trust is fundamental to a high-performing team. And on top of that, having that leadership and buy-in and alignment across the company to really make sure that performance is standardized and communicated across the company. And then the last one is the weekly, daily cadences to keep this from happening. Otherwise, it's not just the start of the year, set the vision, and hope that you achieve it at the end of the year.
Exactly. And that could be a pitfall, right? So it's so good to over-communicate and check in with each other on a weekly basis to also structure that. Yeah.
Okay. I know that we have a lot more to cover, so I'm going to jump into this section. So just to make sure everyone it was the three main things here are trust, making sure that you continuously work on building that trust. And it's not only from a top-down level, but a bottom-up to make sure that everybody feels comfortable and safe in their environments. And leadership is pivotal to make sure that the vision is aligned and the performance approach supports that vision. And then finally, to iterate, continue to iterate. Don't stop at the one time, continue to communicate and make sure that it's being lived and breathed every day. Okay, here we go. This is the next kind of chunky one. So we know we briefly touched upon leadership already and the head coach and assistant coach type of relationship. Mm-hmm. But we know leadership don't always have the luxury of being close to the people all the time. So this is really where HR and managers have that one-to-one relationship with the people. They hire them, they go through the development process with them, they engage with them daily. So moving into the roles and responsibilities, you already touched on it a little bit, Josine, but what, if we start off, how do we define that relationship between HR as a department and managers as a separate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what Laura just mentioned is actually quite interesting, right? As head coach and assisting coaches. Mm-hmm. I kind of like that definition. It's so important for HR and managers to really align on a lot of topics, on the vision, everything that needs to be done. But at the same time, it can also be a pitfall, and that HR takes up too much work, right? So that everything goes to HR and they roll out all these programs. So at the same time, also you need leadership involvement and buy-in, as we spoke before, and that they also take the responsibility. So for me, what really helps is that HR has also, again, structured check-ins with with management to see how they can support them, and where they can support them, and yeah, just that they're approachable, and that's that is structured, and yeah, the roles and responsibility. In order to start solving the gaps. I think then we're also talking about the gaps. I'm just checking, what gaps are we talking about here again?
We were speaking about, we'll come to this in detail, but there's different phases of the employee life cycle. So recruiting, onboarding, performance development,
exactly,
so on.
Yeah.
There's continuous moments where your people are developing. And so
yeah.
you will eventually, at some stage, there will be gaps, there will be changes, there will be shifts.
Yeah.
So how, as an HR leader, as a manager, how do we, first of all, identify that there's a gap in the people space? And so who's responsible for making sure that we either engage with the people and try to close the gap, replace the people? What is it that needs to happen in this space? So
it's quite a big question. I think everyone in the end is responsible because you do it together. But HR can have kind of the umbrella, the structure, the vision about the kind of personal development plans that are there, and about the recruitment phase. So you have indeed the whole employment cycle, it needs to fit. I think it's very important if you want, for example, to create a learning culture, that is one of the company goals, that it aligns with that vision, because otherwise everything that you do kind of falls away. So it definitely should align. The roles and responsibility, I think we're all responsible, but you can help each other out. So HR can indeed on a weekly basis have check-ins with managers to see where they can help out. They can build the structure. So to give an example, at Binder, we had a whole general onboarding week that was all structured, and managers knew what their role was in that whole process. So that was really clear to them. And after the onboarding, we handed it over to the manager. They had a whole onboarding plan ready. So everything was really structured and clear, and everyone knew what to do, kind of. So in that example, HR almost set the structure and made it very clear for managers what their role in it is, and they work together on a daily and weekly basis, and they have a coaching role as well, HR. So if there's a difficult situation, then HR is there to talk about it with the managers and to help them out. What we did, we also set up an internal leadership program so that everything was aligned, how to deal with difficulties, how to deal with difficult conversations, but also job interviews. How do you go about that? So there's tons of things you can do, and I know that we'll get more into detail later, but
absolutely. Laura, I know you have a very strong affiliation with the coaching experience, and so I'd love to, from the phases of an employee life cycle, what is those touch points of?
Absolutely. I think the very first thing in terms of roles and responsibilities is the manager role really has to take a hard look at their staff, whether it's remote or in person, and really figure out what their gaps are. And obviously gaps are going to look a little bit different when you have a full functioning staff in person versus when you have one remotely. Mm-hmm. Some of the founders that I work with have found people that are amazing remotely that struggled in person, and vice versa. So I think that first step is really the managers taking an honest look at their workforce and their teams and deciding what the strengths and weaknesses are, and then really clearly relating what that is to HR so that HR can craft the perfect job description and try to pull in that just right person for that role that is the gap has created. And so with that very first interface of really understanding what the gap is that we need to fill, and then really articulating well to HR what the need is around that, we've already established like the identity or the various specific roles of this person that we need. Mm-hmm. We we join that with sort of the company vision, and then we have a really clear understanding of what it is that we're going out to recruit for. And I think that that's really critical in terms of performing, putting together a high performance team, to have really targeted understanding of gaps and the type of individual that we need to fill that gap.
Yeah.
And then recruiting, onboarding, performance, all of that is they're all really important life cycles, and they all need to be addressed in the recruiting cycle. I think the one thing that's really critical for high team performance and long-term success is to have that integrated, to have the plan and the map of what this employee's life cycle is going to look like within the organization, clearly laid out and defined in that recruiting and hiring process. It just makes all of the other follow-ups, the hard conversations, the good conversations about growth, development, and performance, you've already laid the platform.
Yeah.
So I think that's really where HR and managers need to start, and then all of the other things build out from that.
Yeah. And I think you slightly touched on it. It's a full life cycle, right? So at some point your employees are going to off-board, they're going to grow, they're going to outgrow the role.
Yeah. Right.
It's almost really satisfying when you as a leader have played a part in developing your people to a point where they've really developed and they need to grow in another space.
Absolutely.
How do you, so you're an HR leader and you know that you're not in the day-to-day work of a team with like a manager is. Where do you see the kind of handover or the expectation setting? When does that happen? So you know when to pass the information on or when to step out of that part of the process, because it sounds like there's a lot of communication required here to know what to do and when from an HR and manager relationship.
Yeah, I think that sort of, gets in a little bit to what we're going to talk about next in terms of like bridging the gap and how to do that. I think that there are, communication is the number one key to keeping a high performance team up and running, almost like a chart, right? Like we put a chart up on the board, like where are these different employees or team members, where are they in their own cycle of onboarding, performance, growth, development, promotion, so that everyone can kind of keep their eye on where this employee's life cycle is and what's happening for them.
Yeah.
A lot of, one of the pleasures and one of the great things about working remotely is we've become really great at sharing various things through Google Drive or whatever platform we're using. And so there's a lot of really great, tangible, easy ways to follow employee life cycle and then allow HR and the managers to sort of then come together, like Josine was talking about, and have those check-ins about where is this person, what do we need to move them forward, and who's going to take over that role. Yeah. I think that's a very fluid thing sometimes. And that is where a lot of organizations can get bogged down. Yeah. Is being flexible to that fluidity of how do we manage people, because it changes with each individual to some degree.
Yeah, absolutely. And Josine, I'd love to touch it just a little bit on experience. So you, like you said earlier, run the leadership training, and you've seen a range of managers come in from first-time managers through 20 years experienced managers.
Yeah.
Where does it's not as stagnant, like, I've got 20 years, I'm good at my job type. What are the kind of different challenges that come up from a managerial perspective?
Yeah.
Continuing to be clear on the expectations and setting these roles and responsibilities.
Yeah, it's a good one. So we once started because at Binder there were a lot of first-time managers, maybe just got promoted from an expert role, so there was a completely new role for them. So they didn't really have an example, nor did they have training. So that was really, we rolled it out because of that. It was really needed. So it was also a very practical leadership training where we just guided them through the whole employment cycle and all kinds of conversations that they might encounter. So it starts indeed in the recruitment phase. What do you look for? Ideally, you want a diverse team, because research shows that those teams, diverse teams, are more efficient, better performing than equal teams. which is funny because there's a bias that we tend to actually hire people that are much like us.
Yeah.
All of those things are just good to know, and sometimes people don't know it. So all of these biases and theories, we discussed with them, and we practiced job interviews with all kinds of personality types, shy persons, arrogant persons. You never know what's underneath, and how do you go about it? And then indeed, you continue with the whole coaching of your employees, and maybe indeed one day bad news conversation, or maybe frequent absence, or someone didn't get a salary raise and gets emotional, and how do you handle emotions? And it doesn't even really matter if you're a first-time manager or a manager with 20 years of experience, because we all have our allergies and our difficulties, and our own blind spots. So you also learn a lot about yourself there, and your own natural talents, and the things that actually cost you energy. You would be surprised. Also, managers with 20 years of experience, sometimes they walked away like, oh, I didn't know that about myself, or oh, now I know how to handle this person better. Because they did it like the best that they could for all those years. But and it's nice if you have diverse groups, then they can share with each other, right? And they can learn from each other. So that's always nice. But it's about yourself, right? And communication, and then we will never stop learning, I feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. Laura, did you have anything to add to the experience? Because you've, of course, seen a range of athletes and coaches across your time. Is there a different approach when you're working with experience levels?
Not really. I think everyone really wants the same thing out of leadership, right? Out of that role of the manager and the HR. Everyone wants consistency. Everyone wants to feel valued. So there are just some very humanistic elements that run across any organization, any industry. People are still people. And there are so many things that we can take away in terms of our leadership development. There's so many, right? How we approach tough conversations, how we set the tone, how we address cultural goals, how we promote or not promote. Like there's just all of it has a touch of human decency to it. And I think that's the part that are really successful leaders across industries, right? Across social justice movements, across educational or nonprofit organizations. The greatest leaders, managers, HR, all of that, they really make sure that they're touching on those basic human needs through all of these steps of the process. Yeah. Like everyone needs to know that their effort is being recognized and valued, right? Like we all need that in our world. And
so it's also so important to recognize those small efforts and to celebrate successes. I cannot mention that enough. So important. And especially now, because it's so difficult, remote working, less maybe contact moments. A lot of calls, but a lot is about content. You dive into content from call to call to call, and not those small check-ins in the kitchen. So it's so important also to recognize each other. Yeah, absolutely, Ron.
Yeah, and just quickly before we jump into the next section, there's we're already touching on the recognition piece, but there's a question that's come up about how do you distribute recognition equally through the team when you maybe have one really high-performing team member, and making sure that everyone is driven, even if they're not performing at their peak.
Stay human. So have conversations with everyone, and everyone has unique talents and natural talents. So it's also almost an art of being in the right spot also for your team members. Are they really thriving? Ask them what really motivates you, and find that out. And just basically ask them, have conversations. And of course, whenever you see that someone is doing a great job, recognize them. And it's actually funny that you say that sometimes high-performing team members, as we call them, they are sometimes forgotten too, because, they're doing a good job. But they also want to hear that they're doing a good job. So that's a human need for sure. So through the small conversation, I would say.
One of the pitfalls in giving feedback and performance and support often comes in our wording, our language. One of the things that I see happen a lot at that high level, it's really easy to praise and reward the highest performing person within an organization. But sometimes what someone brings to an organization isn't just the performance base. Maybe they're the individual that makes everyone laugh or smile or, feel a little bit better about themselves. And so really being specific in your praise and what you're praising someone for is really, really critical. And I think that the other really important thing to this that I work with leaders with on a regular basis is there's a difference between praise and the time for praise and praise attached with, oh, by the way, you should also be doing this. It's very important to have clear times when you're just saying thank you, and then very clear times where you're saying these are the things that you're doing well, and this is where I'd like to see growth. One of the biggest things is when we do go into those conversations about growth, we really want to watch our wording and make sure that the praise is put together with an and instead of the praise put together with a but. But is an immediate negator of the first part of that. So it's just all of these really small, minute, finesse details that come together. But,
totally agree. Yeah.
Amazing. I feel like we could talk about recognition for a long time. I'm gonna move us along, but there is a question that we will come back to in the chat, which is specific to the current climate and Corona. How do you motivate and recognize people in this climate when they're remote, feeling worried, anxious about the global situation? We will come back to it. I'm gonna
good one
at the end for the Q&A, so please do keep asking the questions. We're not ignoring you, I promise. So the three main takeaways in this section is the roles and responsibilities and clarity and alignment. So keeping on communicating between HR and managers, whose role is it and when in the process does that change throughout the employee life cycle? And then expectation setting. So be explicit. Don't take it for granted that somebody knows what you're saying or what you mean. Continue to open that dialogue and be very explicit with what you need. And then finally, it's an ongoing process. So the employee life cycle doesn't stop at recruiting, and it's not only HR's job to do anything. So we need to continue to find frameworks or processes that work for both HR and managers at every phase of the employee life cycle, including offboarding, because you're often a reference point for the employee after they leave. So it's a very important part of the process as well. And then finally, let's get straight into it. I know we already spoke about earlier that there's a lot of data out there that employees do not leave bosses. They don't leave companies, they leave their managers if they're having bad experiences. And we know there's a lot of data out there that talks about the business value of retaining your top talent, of growing your people, investing in your people. And so how can we really do this? Can we talk about some really tangible examples here? I know we've both got different experience here, so I'd love, Josine, if you could go first a little bit. I think you touched on this earlier, but you speak a little bit about building trust and self-disclosure. One of the so over to you.
That's a good one. Building trust and having trust as a foundation is an important one because research also shows that there's a book about it called 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni, and Google did research, Google Aristotle, that really shows the foundation is trust. To have an effective team, there should be trust. I cannot say it enough, but how do you gain trust? One very practical thing as a leader is to use self-disclosure. So to also share your vulnerabilities, to, if you receive feedback from your team, to show your team, hey, thank you for the feedback. This is what I will be working on. I think that's very strong. And sometimes leaders kind of forget that they can do that because, but I'm the leader. Can I do it? But it actually invites others to do the same. And they feel like, hey, okay, so my manager also does it, or HR also does it. It's very transparent. And then, they can open up themselves. And this also works with small things like what you did in the weekend. What are your challenges? All of these things. So self-disclosure is a very effective, I would say tool. Don't use it, right? It should be kind of your nature, but and make it yourself. But it really works. So that's very practical. And yeah, other things are having regular check-ins, gather feedback, as much feedback as you can on all of these things, like happiness, effectiveness, performance. And then, of course, you can use software for that. So HR really can support the management there. Yeah.
Loretta, do you want to share your a few exercises or examples, like especially in the COVID angle? How do you support managers?
Exactly. I think, the number one thing that happens during COVID is everyone's a little bit unsure of how to approach people in COVID. How's everyone doing? And sometimes there's so many elements to this time during COVID that one of the things that HR can really make sure that they're doing is ask their managers to reach out directly. Not if your organization has enough people power to be able to do that individual check-in in times of major shift and crisis is really critical. How are you? How has your life been affected by this? How can we support you? What expectations do you need shifted, and what roles can you take on that maybe you couldn't have taken on before? And what things do you maybe need to pass off because of what's happening within your home life? So I think that's a really important way for HR and managers to step in, not just in times of COVID, but any time of crisis, to try to really get a good immediate feel for what's happening for the people of the organization. That's really critical. And then I think the next practice is HR and the managers really need to check in with each other on a regular basis. A lot of times in this remote world, in this remote setting, people are hesitant to require like a set time to check in because they want to be respectful of people's time or their situation. But ultimately, if we don't have those really scheduled, honest check-ins, people start to feel a little lost and they start to feel more disconnected. So, during COVID, we really do, as HR managers, need to create and carve out that time to talk about our people and to find out what it is that our people need and how can we continue to adjust to it. And that will change as either we get a vaccine and things kind of go back to normal, or maybe this is our new normal. And I think that part is that's where that, bridging that gap is so critical. That way, like really bringing it together.
And the responsibility isn't solely one person's, right? If I'm a manager and I really need support, I should reach out to HR, and vice versa. If the business priorities shift, then we need to communicate that that's happening. You should be approachable as HR as well, right? So be open and set the example. But indeed, it's both ways. And I love what you said, Laura, about that connection. Establish your connection first. Ask, how are you doing? Because it's such crazy times. People are stressed, anxious, and maybe some people are thriving now, of course. But always check in with each other. Like, how are you really doing? That's so easy to forget. With these calls, and you just need your moments to release your stress. Normally, you had that maybe with a high five in the hall or a quick kitchen check-in, but now. We kind of crave that. So definitely use 5 minutes before each call just to check in with each other, definitely. I'm wondering that there's often a feeling that the relationship between an employee with a manager can be very professional, and I'm not allowed to be human. And I can't tell you that, I just broke up with my boyfriend, so I'm having a bad day and I can't do my project, something like that. What are the tools maybe that a manager can really create that safe space for their team to make sure that they are getting honest answers from their team? Because often somebody will just say, I'm fine.
Exactly. And they're not fine.
Josine hit on that originally when she started this topic of that self-disclosure piece. But we also do have to understand that everyone's personal comfort in disclosure can vary. And so I think sometimes people aren't willing to share what's really happening for them, but there are other questions that we can ask to kind of get around that. Do you need your schedule shifted at all? Is there a certain part of your role that is going to be challenging for you to do? Is there a different part of your role that you feel like you can handle 100% from your remote location?
Yeah.
So sometimes just asking really specific questions about their job responsibilities will allow them to disclose to you what it is that they are comfortable doing in the new environment without them feeling the pressure of having to disclose their entire personal situation.
Exactly. So that's always up to them how much they will share, right?
Yeah.
And what you can always do, because if I understand you well, so someone asks a question like, "Hey, how are you doing?" and you obviously feel like something's up, but the person isn't sharing it.
Yeah.
But you see it, and why do you see it? It's often body language, right, or something that you feel, and that's even something you can mention, like, "Hey, I see you're quiet," or "Hey, I see you're upset." Just label it, and by labeling it, the other person feels recognized. And if you drop a good silence there, the person has a chance to share it. Like, oh man, it's too much. So label the emotions, and there's different strategies, asking questions for sure. Just try.
Yeah. I really like that. I really like all the options that you have. I can see there is a lot of questions going on, so I'm just going to summarize this section that we spoke about. So making sure that there's continuous feedback loops. You're not just stopping at the traditional performance review, final end of year performance touch point, and then that is it for the employee to get a conversation going. Making sure that you really listen at this time, especially that you give them the space to be heard, whether or not they're ready to speak, but just giving them those opportunities to frequently be heard and be transparent. And then finally, the really important one here is where HR and managers need to continue to connect with each other, problem solve, communicate when there's challenges, or even the solutions of recognizing people when there's good things going on. So not only for the bad things, but of course the good things as well. And there are many more things that you can talk about on this topic, but I think what I'd love to do now is actually open the floor to some questions. And my colleague currently sent me a few questions that have come in. So first of all, what are some of the signs that you can see in a company that it's time to start hiring for those gaps, that there's an indication that you need to make change, or there's something you need to do about it?
Yeah. I think you really have to rely heavy on your managerial staff to have a pulse on what's happening. I think when all of your team is starting to feel overwhelmed by the work and what they have to do, that managers need to recognize what's a rough week versus what has become a rough pattern. And that's when they really need to advocate to HR and the founder or the leader of the organization that this is a space where we now need growth.
Yeah.
It's, of course, we're all going to have busy weeks in our cycle, but I think as leaders, if we can identify where those busy weeks and times in the cycle are going to be and adequately prepare the team for that, we're going to be fine. But if we're starting to see upticks and busy weeks and cycles and people feeling overwhelmed in times where traditionally they shouldn't be, that definitely is time to look at growth and look at how to scale that part of the company.
Yeah, that's a good one. Did you have anything to add to that?
No, nothing to add there. No.
Yeah. I'd love to circle back to the comment earlier about how do you motivate and keep engaged, recognized, connected in this moment where we're not physically able to see each other at the moment.
Yeah, that's a good one. I always say turn on your video because then at least you have some non-verbal cues and your facial expressions. That helps. Otherwise, you have to do it with only tone of voice. Check in often with each other and make time to connect. What we said before, right? To really ask, hey, how are you doing? I also saw some great initiatives where there were all these workshops organized internally, like yoga sessions, mindfulness, and maybe even like coffee sessions where everyone could call in and just kind of have sort of coffee with each other, kind of like an office channel. So yeah, all those initiatives help to kind of still connect with each other and share successes and learn from each other. Maybe internal learning programs, now remotely. Yeah, good software, of course. Yeah, those things.
Laura, have you had any additional examples that you've got specifically around the motivation, engagement, recognition?
Absolutely. I think, in athletics, people are very clearly motivated by goals and information and expectations of what performance outcomes should be. And so I think that one of the things that's really critical in leading in times of uncertainty is to make sure, like Josine talked about, that you do have a weekly check-in or a daily check-in to set the tone for the week. But then you also really have to set really clear expectations on what your targets and your goals are for the week. So then at the end of the week, you can really celebrate those. But we're talking about high-level performance teams. People are really motivated by goal setting and reaching those goals. And if they're really clearly defined at the beginning of the week and everyone's on track and we're hitting targets or getting close to targets by the end of the week, it makes that Friday afternoon catch up fun and something to look forward to.
Yeah.
And I think that that's so critical. And then telling people, take the weekend off, go do something fun, turn your off, like really self-care, like go celebrate, we crush the week. And next week's going to be a little easier. It might be a little bit harder, but really, like, don't be afraid to define the performance goal, even in times of uncertainty. Because if we have a really definite performance goal, then we can get in behind it and it still feels a little bit more normal.
Yeah. And I saw that someone asked, like, how can we support it from an HR perspective? And I would also say, ask your people, what do they need? What motivates them? What do they really need now? And maybe they will come up with great ideas, right? Yeah.
So something like a pulse survey that just goes out to the team with even just an open field where they can type their own suggestions or recommendations.
I love that.
I think I really like that. What you're saying is it's not HR's full responsibility to come up with every single answer.
No.
The people are a huge source of information and knowledge.
Yeah, make use of it. Yeah.
Going through it themselves, right? So if you just open that channel up to allow them to come to you with suggestions or feedback or recommendations, it's a really nice one. And or I like that you touched upon really using the weekly cadence to not make it so we don't need to get quarterly goals achieved in 1 week. We can really do something smaller. And of course, there are tools that support you with making sure that there are goals in place, and then you can all be looking in the same space to come back and know you're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Any more questions in the chat? I think we have time for a couple more. Been some great suggestions on the fish philosophy is
nice. Yeah, I love it. People are also sharing their tips with each other. Yeah, so there was also a question about how do you motivate someone who's feeling stretched, anxious, and stressed. And again, right, make sure safety first. So if they're really overwhelmed, then they have to take their time off and they need a break. And then those signs are very clear, because otherwise, you will probably get bigger problems or that person. So definitely give that person space and rest, and ask what the person needs. That's very, again, check in with that person. What does she need? And ask how you can help and support. Much like what you would do with a friend. I always say, think friend. What would you do? Maybe give a hug, but now that's difficult, right? But
Well, and I think once again, like a high performing team is about performance, right? And so in athletics, when we look at someone that is struggling, sometimes it's a physical injury, sometimes it's an emotional injury, but an honest assessment of where are you and what is your ability to add to this team right now? And if it's okay if you can't for a physical reason. And sometimes that is emotional. Sometimes that's like surgery, like I broke my arm and I can't type. But all of those things need to be treated the same way.
Yeah.
What most people want when they're feeling anxious and depressed and a little bit out of control is they want control. They want control of the situation. And so giving them that control, but also letting them understand that this is a high performance team and we do need you to come back when you're ready to perform.
Yeah.
If you need time, you need to take it. And it's the same thing as a broken arm or a broken leg or in the hospital with COVID, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have to treat those the same way. And we have to, once again, set that expectation of when you're ready to come back and perform at a high level.
Yeah, I like it.
We want you back. Your job will be here.
Yeah, and as companies pay attention to it, I also saw some initiatives of Mental Health Week and things like that. So people also feel like, hey, okay, it's okay. You know, I'm not crazy. It's important to take care of myself too. Yeah.
We're only human at the end of the day. No matter how many technology we have, there's only so much we can do, right? So I really like the examples that you gave. Looks to me there's lots more comments coming in. And the final question I have for you both is actually more focused. You already touched on the performance, but is there in the current climate, how do you know that it's the right time to really do a performance evaluation, or is it just a gut feeling from a manager and HR point of view, or is it Q4 we have to do a performance evaluation?
If you're a high performing team, you have to hit targets. We can't shy away from this concept of evaluation and managing our people during time of COVID or whatever crisis we're going through, whether it's, California was literally burning down a couple of weeks ago, right? So how do we merge those? We do have to have performance evaluations, but what sometimes comes out of performance evaluations is the need for change at the HR level or the need for shift in job roles. Once again, so many founders have found people that are just great at doing X, Y, or Z now that weren't before. Yeah. And if we don't take on those performance evaluations and have honest conversations about goal setting and where we need to go as a company or as a group, we're going to hold the whole company back, right?
And people also kind of like that because they expect it. We've always been doing it, so it's also they like control. They know what's coming. So I would say keep on doing that, but be flexible at the same time. So listen to your people. Totally.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'm going to jump back into this final section to make sure that we cover off the topic that we originally started with. So.
Oh yeah, good one, Darsh.
The summary of what we covered today. So first of all, trust. Trust is the most important foundational thing in any team, whether it's at a leadership level or just on, a sporting team, to make sure you have that trust and don't stop once. Continue to have those feedback loops. Second to that is define and clearly communicate the roles and responsibilities from HR and you. And if there is unclarity, ask if you need more clarification. Thirdly, align on those expectations. Ensure that they're connected to what the company vision and values are. It's not just a project over here by itself, but it all comes together from an overall company point of view. Number 4, listen to your people. Josine touched on that many times, to make sure you're there, you're available for them if they need anything. And then finally, follow through. Make sure you have a plan. Take action on what the feedback you get. Even if you can't take action, make sure you communicate that this is the focus priority at the time. There's only so much you can do as an HR department and as a manager. So just be open and transparent with what you're available for. And then lastly, it's just the next steps. So thank you to Sapling and both Impraise for supporting this webinar. There's 2 more coming up in the future, which you will be able to register for. The information will come out in the following emails, so please keep an eye out for those. And Josine, I know you have a little bit of exciting news that you wanted to share before we finally tie it off.
Yeah, I started together with a co-trainer a new label called Bravely, and we've actually been live since yesterday with a new online program as well, Mindful Working. So it kind of fits and relates to this topic as well. So that's super exciting. Yeah.
Thank you. Congratulations on your new business. And of course,
thank you.
We'll share the information, and everyone asking on the chat, we will share the slides as well. And there's more resources both from Laura and from Josine that we will share afterwards, so you can get in touch if you have any more questions. But thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you guys again soon.
Thank you, Darsh. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you so much to everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
See you later.
To our participants. Thanks, Josine. Thanks, Doug.
Bye-bye.
Bye.